Sexual harassment and sexual assault are like spinning saw blades. They're hypnotic. A dark part of you wants to know what it feels like to touch them. You want to reach out and see, but you know if you do, you'll lose fingers. So I think there's only one way to really breach the subject. Hit it, girls. All right. Bad joke. Let's get serious here. Hello, greater YouTube area and the surrounding internet regions. This is Killer Cardinal DA7. I have a confession to make. I love women. Alright, maybe confession isn't the best word to use there. It carries kind of a negative connotation, and as we all know, there's nothing innately wrong or inappropriate with a mostly cisgender, heterosexual, white male loving women, right? So I'll tell you what, why don't I define what I mean by love? That way you know where I'm coming from. Before I do that, a couple of quick disclaimers. First of all, I'm not sharing this definition of my love for women because I think a woman's destiny is solely to be assessed or interpreted by men, or that they're only put on this earth for men to play with like little toys. I share this simply because it's how I feel. It's not the responsibility of one or any women to live up to standards that please me, nor any standards at all for that matter. Live however you like. I'm allowed to appreciate you in safe and healthy ways. Second, I know full well that even just saying that I want to discuss women or harassment or assault pisses some people off, as many women and men feel there isn't any discussion needed. That discussing it equates to surrender to the systemic problems plaguing our society, or deflecting enough so that the actual pain and struggle aren't being addressed. Discussion muddies the water so that men don't have to take responsibility for their actions. All these factors make the act of analysis or examination about societal roles, expectations, behavior, etc., a verbal minefield, in that if I tiptoe in a single syllable that sounds disagreeable, questionable, or imply anything at all about a member of the audience or the subject matter, it can lead to explosions, losing limbs, dismemberment, blood and guts, bodies being shredded by shrapnel, and body parts being blown to irreparable pieces. So while I plan to tread lightly through this minefield, I do plan to tread through it. Whoever you happen to be, listener or viewer, chances are pretty significant I'm going to be talking about you at some point. Just be prepared. If it makes it any easier for you to continue on to the end, I'll try to be as nice about it as possible. That part at the beginning was just a joke. I said I want to get serious, and I mean that. So, when I say I love women, as in members of that particular gender, here's what that means, and brace yourself, it's not that short. This is a YouTube discussion video, not a fun-sized, single-serving tweet. Put it on in the background of your chores, or job, or workout, or whatever, and just listen. What I mean is, I'm fascinated by women, intrigued by them, sometimes infatuated. I'm interested in listening to their viewpoints. I'm curious when I share similarities with them, as much as when I share differences with them. I'm confused by some of their behavior patterns sometimes, but I'm also eager to find out why I do some of the same things they do, why they do some of the same things I do. I want to figure them out in the hope that I can understand them better while respecting who they are at the same time. And respect obviously means treating women as equals, which isn't to say women are below me and I bring them up to my level, just that I respect whatever hierarchy exists in a given situation and strangers get a baseline. For example, when I work with women I like a lot, I don't call them by pet names, I don't talk down to them, I don't treat them like children. I defer to their decisions or experience when they either hold a position of power above me or clearly know more than me about how to perform certain tasks. When I go out in public, I know it's not okay for me to bother women I don't know, or follow them around, or grasp at any reason to flirt, or feel entitled to touch them when not invited to do so, or stare at them for long periods of time. I feel amazing when women interact with me unprompted, but as much as I wish that would happen more without having to change myself, I'm typically willing to settle with the interactions I get with women exactly as those interactions are, and not push them in directions I'm pretty certain they don't want to go in, whether consciously or subconsciously. Finally, I find most women beautiful when I see them. I'm happy hearing their voices. The majority of women I've had the privilege of being physically close to, I thought they smelled nice. I liked how smooth their skin felt, and in case you were wondering about that fifth sense, I'm going to keep how they tasted to myself. I think that's pretty much the bulk of it from as broad a perspective as I can give. I realize all that probably sounded like a mountain of virtue signaling. This dude right here is down with respecting women, why aren't you, bro? That's not what I'm going for at all here. I shared this for a very particular reason. See, I painstakingly crafted the last couple of paragraphs of this script, even after editing it and rereading the whole thing a ton of times, to ensure that not a single word of that bit was out of line. Not a single thing implied that women do anything to me to bring out my feelings, or that they're responsible for how I feel, or that the way they look or sound or the things they say egg me on to being some kind of animal. I reread those paragraphs a ton of times before recording the audio for this to ensure that that type of thing wasn't in there at all. Not just because I want to be respectful, but because I know content like this can be heavily scrutinized by women keen to sense when a man is saying anything deemed offensive or marginalizing, up to and including moving the part about my senses from the beginning of the definition to the end. I wanted to put the beauty and senses talk at the beginning of that section because sight and sound are typically what I experience first when meeting a woman, then maybe touch and smell if we shake hands or she's wearing a fragrance. Then as we talk, I get to know her better and I can decide how I feel about her intelligence or charm or wit or whatever else. And that would be entirely mutual, as a woman I meet will ultimately be doing the exact same with me, assessing how I look first, how I feel, how I sound, and overall how I come across. Physical senses reach a person first, but I put that stuff at the end to keep women from thinking that's all I care about, or that I only focus on a woman's appearance and nothing else, even at the risk of pissing off male audience members and having them call me a white knight cuck because, oh, he's intrigued and fascinated by women and wants to hear their viewpoints. What a little noble SJW. I said before that this is a verbal minefield. I never said who laid those mines or for what purpose. Now, in regard to heavily editing this to keep from scaring women off, is that to imply that, quote, nasty women who, quote, persist because they're fed up with inappropriate behavior from men are the problem? Absolutely not. Being labeled nasty is something we've all seen happen when some men view women as acting up or speaking out of turn, and plenty of women out there have turned those two remarks from Donald Trump and Mitch McConnell into badges of honor. But that, and what I've said up to this point, are what this particular video is about. Analyzing the most surface aspects, the words and phrases used, the imagery seen, the concepts floating around in the world that we accept or don't accept, the impressions we take away, how skewed some of those things can be, but also when some of those things make sense and we should worry about them. I really want to believe men and women can learn to come to some understanding, and wading our way through a lot of this I think is necessary to help that happen. We have a severe problem in America, and that empathy is on a distinct decline. What's on an incline is how often people not only discard empathy for others, but then expect others to give it back to them. Seems pretty stupid mathematically, doesn't it? I've never held more than maybe one or two real guns in my life, the vast majority being toys, super soakers, and carnival novelties, but I'm pretty sure that if I were to shoot someone in the chest, then wonder why the person bleeding on the ground isn't worrying about me, that'd be a tiny bit illogical. If we're going to dive into this problem, and if I'm going to dedicate multiple videos to it, let's all keep in mind that in order for us to help each other, we actually need to hear each other's views and concerns. We all need to change something, even just in little ways that may not affect our daily lives much or just shift our views a little. And we need to refrain from thinking everyone else changing and our individual privilege of never having to modify a single thing about ourselves is in any way a likely outcome. We blew past that point a long fucking time ago. Alright, let's talk for a moment about a recent hashtag that went around on social media. You probably saw it pop up. Hashtag MeToo. The way this worked was simple. Any woman who had been sexually harassed or assaulted would post the hashtag MeToo on their feed or wall, the intention being to show just how many women, especially women you personally may know, have been sexually assaulted or harassed in their lives. Obviously, most of us who frequent social media saw thousands of posts that day, if not millions, and that sheer volume of people was supposed to send a message, mostly to men, and hopefully yield some amount of support, or, as I said a moment ago, empathy. There are very likely men out there like me who found this to be rather horrifying. Even if you support women or try to be respectful, exactly how do you go about empathizing with every one of those women simultaneously? I'll admit I saw it and had no idea what to do. Do I call all these women, visit them, message each one? Admittedly, I didn't really do anything outside of shifting my view and broadening it. These topics have been changing shape and course vigorously over the past year, and it's been long overdue. Some men got adamantly angry about it. I refrained from going that far. I don't know if it's a guy thing or just how I personally am, but I mostly got analytical. The very distinct problem I noticed with it was that it kind of placed every form of harassment and misconduct on the same exact level. Even the words of the hashtag MeToo suggested almost anyone could get in on it if they believed their experience hurt them the right way. As I observed its reactions and others analyzing it, and because it was an overly simple hashtag, and because the attitude is usually that a person's suffering shouldn't need detailing or exposure or proof, lots of people, mostly men, unfortunately poke giant holes in it. The people it was most meant to reach kind of missed the point. Then again, it being a simple hashtag, I'm not entirely sure the next step in the plan was really thought about anyway. It was soon followed by the hashtag time's up, hashtag why I stayed, likely many others. I want to support all these hashtags, but I want to support action much more so. Bill Maher recently did a piece on his HBO show Real Time where he asked if liberals really wanted to be, quote, the distinction deniers. In other words, while liberals are supposed to be the discussion people, the ones willing to talk things out and discern facts from alternative facts, the people who rail against the, quote, post-truth era, the MeToo hashtag and subsequent comments from Senator Kristen Gillibrand like, quote, when we start having to talk about the differences between sexual harassment and sexual assault and unwanted groping, you're having the wrong conversation, may have attempted to raise harassment like remarks or comments to the height of rape in terms of how severely we punish it. They also likely lowered some people's view of rape to that of simple remarks or comments, thus diluting both. I completely understand where the sentiment of Me Too comes from, and the more I read about how women feel about certain types of treatment, even someone like me who takes my respect of women seriously, whether I succeed or fail at actually showing that respect, I accept that there are ways I can adjust my behavior to make other people more comfortable. I'm fine with reasonable adjustments. However, Bill's point stands. Remarks and rape shouldn't be placed on the same level. There are degrees to consider. As he says, can't we just have a separate discussion? Exactly. Why does it have to be just one? These things have been problems for decades, if not centuries. One single conversation isn't going to solve everything in one fell swoop. I know time's up, but 1, 2, or even 3 hashtags aren't going to change how people look at certain words. It takes a lot more communicating and a lot more agreeing. Take assault and misconduct as another comparison. Assault is sometimes used to describe an action like groping, and while non-consensual, unprompted, and uninvited groping is absolutely not an acceptable way to treat anybody, assault feels like it wildly over-dramatizes something that could be as quick as a touch. A person gets mugged on the street, they're beaten within an inch of their life and robbed of their property. They didn't have their money or valuables groped. They were assaulted. However, saying that does present a problem, because if things as light as touches and squeezes aren't addressed as if they're assault, nothing changes and guys not only keep groping women, but it then gets pushed even further. Much in the same way people view the speed limit as not so much a limit, but as a guideline. Even cops are like, it's only 10 over. I'm not pulling out of my hiding spot for 10 over, 15 over minimum. Palming a woman's ass over her clothes and snaking fingers into her underwear are both unacceptable forms of behavior. Neither of those things should be done without explicitly knowing if a woman is okay with it or not, but one of those two things is clearly more invasive and harder to explain as a mistake or accident than the other. Everyone should be more reserved on the whole and assume most touching is not okay before you know someone better. One woman might not want to be touched by anyone, and that's completely fine for her to feel that way. She's allowed to determine that. Another woman might be the most affectionate person walking the earth and see occasional gropes as rather flattering, and that's okay also, while in the right setting, and as long as others know this explicitly. Neither one of those women should be judged from any angle for determining their personal level of comfort. But guys, we need to pay attention to which women are okay with that and which aren't. Not every guy who squeezes one woman in their life is a predatory, patriarchal lunatic arrogantly expressing male station over women via physical force, but guys, if you do that to the wrong women, you should absolutely be expected to apologize and not do it again. A guy who makes one wrong move because they misread a signal and at least has the decency to express remorse or guilt or embarrassment after the fact doesn't deserve crucifixion. However, there are men who do that to women all the time. They grab women all the time, make rude comments all the time, talk down to women all the time. They have no remorse or accept any responsibility for how they act and get angry when they're called sexist or misogynist. Can we agree that that seems a little silly? Men like that do deserve some type of backlash. They need to know they're crossing lines they shouldn't be crossing, and even if all of their male peers don't jump on the bandwagon of burning at the stake every male that gropes a woman a single time, we can still show more condemnation of the worst possible offenders. Quick note, there are also men who don't like being touched or grabbed unprompted either, so like I said, we all should be more reserved in how we treat each other. Feel out a person's comfort level before physically reaching for one another and invading each other's spaces. I happen to love being affectionate with others, especially women, and I love when they're affectionate with me for no other reason than showing their appreciation for my work or being close by or helping them in some way. But if I don't know where a woman's comfort level is, I'd much rather hold myself back from lunging for a hug and waiting for her to make that move than risk her getting freaked out by the huggy grabby guy. Makes her think that maybe she can hug me again down the line instead of having to duck out the door early because she knows I'll be coming for her. Now, while the word assault can exaggerate things once in a while, but probably should be used more often given the frequency or sensitivity of particular touching, the word misconduct seems to underestimate certain things. It sounds like a vocal faux pas was committed, something that should be far easier to apologize for and rectify, something that was a bad thing to do but may not deserve formal punishment. And that word misconduct is sometimes used to describe far worse offenses like rape. Rape isn't misconduct, that's a fucking crime. Rape is violate another person's entire life to the point of it being hard to escape or move on from. Misconduct sounds like being at work and telling someone a dirty joke in the kitchen the wrong person walks in. Misconduct sounds like asking a married woman on a date and when she rejects you, you say, "But you flipped your hair and smiled, you were totally sending signals." That's rude, it's misconduct, it's not a crime. An article on nymag.com from November 20th of last year was entitled, quote, "What happened to the 16 women who accused Trump of sexual misconduct?" Some of those things are minor, like I said the word misconduct implies. Bragging about sexual encounters, he tries to kiss a woman or two, but other instances are pretty significant rape accusations, trying to finger a girl unprompted. Maybe here the word misconduct is being used in a broader sense because the article is talking about lots of different instances with different levels of intensity, but if we're to make any headway in talking about any of this, we need to be clear on some of the definitions, the most popular phrases, words, and ideas that people hurl at each other. Ever hear of something called toxic masculinity? That could use some examination in both directions. I put a link to Wikipedia in the description, but they define it as, quote, "dominance, devaluation of women, extreme self-reliance, and the suppression of emotions," unquote. Now, a couple things to consider up front. First, if you visit the link I provided, you'll notice I conveniently cut off the beginning part of that definition that says, quote, "The concept of toxic masculinity is used in the social sciences to describe traditional norms of behavior among men in contemporary American and European society." Now, it's not that I think that Wikipedia is wrong by this or spreading fake news with the beginning of that definition. I just know if I said that part first before mentioning the things that can cause problems, like dominance, promotes extreme self-reliance and suppression of emotions, some men hearing this would pick out the part that says traditional norms of behavior among men in contemporary American and European society and immediately want to argue against it because they'll think it's about them and they'll feel the need to defend themselves before this part even gets started. Verbal minefield, remember? Second, I emphasize the word can there for a reason. Outside of the devaluation of women thing, which is usually harmful however you slice it, the other three things have some uses, albeit few and only in specific circumstances, mostly involving competition or sport. Domination and the aggression that comes along with it is undeniably entertaining to see in events like fighting or American football. Baseball involves two teams like other professional sports, but unlike others like football or basketball, it mostly requires single players being self-reliant lest they commit errors that damage the entire team's success. And in most competition, while drawing on emotions can lead to extra drive or energy, letting your emotions get the best of you sometimes leads to bad decision making, roughhousing, drawing fouls and penalties, which can also bring the team down and hold everyone back from victory, so it tends to be best to hold emotion back or be in greater control of it to keep from causing everyone else to lose. In a weird way, defining the whole scope of toxic masculinity kind of flies in the face of being an athlete overall, which is interesting because more and more women every single day are getting into more sports, whether involving balls or combat. I'll agree, lots of male children are still to this day railroaded into playing sports when some aren't cut out for it. Some boys, like me, would rather write or be creative or use our imaginations, and considering traits that come along with toxic masculinity are almost interwoven into being an athlete, maybe requiring male children to play sports or pushing them to do so isn't as healthy or innocent a decision as it used to be. Like I said, some aspects may be useful, but outside of sports and competition, it may be career or business pursuit, which can closely resemble sporting competition. When we encourage an entire gender of young people to be a certain way as passionately as we do, those young people are bound to let the inevitable abundance of domination, self-reliance, and suppression of emotions that come along with those activities spill over into most aspects of their daily lives, which unquestionably presents bigger and very real problems for people who those dominant, self-reliant, or emotionally repressed people deal with. Link is in the description to an article from Ranker.com citing 15 athletes convicted of sexual assault, but obviously most people can cite a ton more. This isn't to say being an athlete or having a passion for competition is bad or fates you to being aggressive to an awful degree, just that we need to be careful that certain aspects of that don't overlap into life outside of competition. And over the course of history, it's very likely been more encouraged in males than females, thus making it a bit more of our problem, guys, than theirs. What's interesting to me is that most males probably see themselves as more logical and more in control compared to women who they see as more emotional and nurturing. Biological and psychological studies seem to corroborate that, even if some people disagree and or males and females demonstrate their ability to deprogram from those biological imperatives. Plenty of logical women, plenty of emotional men, but given that, to see so many men act like crystal statues ready to shatter at the slightest puff of air from liberal or feminist sources shows men clearly losing control of their emotions, then attempting to dominate the accusers with as many other men who feel just as defensive as they do. The men who rail against toxic masculinity the hardest essentially give into it in the end. They claim liberals spend lots of time triggering, well, this type of thing triggers them just as much. The best thing for those men to do in those conversations is to stay calm and talk, but instead they get angry and lash out. Not the smartest way to proceed. There are definitely women out there who use the term toxic masculinity, but actually are comfortable with making the distinction between masculinity and toxic masculinity. However, much like the name Black Lives Matter, as I pointed out several videos ago, it can be evocative of particular feelings. If a cartoon like the one from thenib.com that I linked in the description needs to exist to describe, quote, what we mean when we say toxic masculinity, then two things. One, chances are really high that some people aren't going to see that cartoon to define it for them, and two, clearly the name has failed in accurately depicting what it's defining and instead is being leaned on due to the reaction it gets more than how effective it is at conveying how much of a problem it is. Black Lives Matter may, in some people's eyes, provoke certain reactions or a sense of victimhood in others, but at least it's suggesting something positive. Black lives do, in fact, matter. Toxic masculinity just slaps a negative adjective on the beginning of a concept many women aren't fond of already. Well, shit, I can't imagine why some people are misinterpreting that. Then again, how often does a woman backpedal a half step and say, wait, before you get too pissed, let me define it for you. Maybe it applies more than you anticipated. Let's talk it over. Does that happen often? No. Women assume men are immediately aggressive and angry before even talking to some, and in their defense, social media is filling up with men being aggressive and angry these days, but then you'd think because of that, women would be adjusting their approach to weave between the attitudes psychologically to get the point across. Instead, they lean on an antagonistic term like toxic masculinity, thinking the negative reaction it gets validates the term's truth, when it turns men into self-fulfilling prophecies. You're being toxically masculine. I'm not fucking toxic, you bitch. And the conversation's over. Another not so smart way to proceed. Message to the guys though, if you want that shit to stop, start listening. Always ask questions and listen. Some women will most assuredly tell you what they think you should do and completely sabotage their own argument. Others will explain something to you maturely, politely, intelligently, and make a really good case without needing an abrasive word like toxic to inspire you to prove their point for them. I have to say, the idea that in 2018 men are shied away from things like crying and showing weakness reminds me of when I was much younger. Women claiming that more men needed to, quote, embrace their feminine sides. That was a big thing years ago. And I agree with that to some extent. If you're a guy and you went to a Disney movie or you watch This Is Us and those things make you cry, just own that shit. Should men be expected to do those things or harassed when we don't? No. It's fair that women find it offensive that some men have standards about how women should look, but it's just as unfair when women expect every man to be an overflowing nexus of feelings when it's just not in some men's wheelhouses. If you're a man and you happen to be emotional though, own it and don't be ashamed. I'd rather see guys be honest and cry than watch a guy struggle to maintain some illusion of unflappable badassery better than every other guy struggling at maintaining theirs. Second confession of the video, I've shed plenty of tears in the past playing Final Fantasy and Kingdom Hearts games, and for some reason that I've yet to put my finger on, watching the cutscenes at the end of the second Dream Quest and Warframe gets me emotional. Here are my testicles, won't need these anymore, I'm obviously not male if I'm crying. If more men the past 10 to 20 years have been embracing their weakness or emotions, that's not a bad thing. Women dig at men for powering their way through being sick, not going to the doctor, or passing on taking medicine, but then when we cringe under a blanket and whine and moan while ill and embrace weakness once in a while, our girlfriends and wives post on Facebook that stupid meme that says, during labor the pain is so great a woman can almost imagine what a man feels like when he has a fever. So we either stay strong and vigilant in the face of discomfort, illness, and disadvantage and get criticized, or we embrace our weakness and whine and groan and get criticized for that too. Now some women may be hearing this and are now channeling the harsh requirements they think they face. Let me see if I can think of some. Okay, here we go. If you're conservative sexually, you're prudes. If you're promiscuous, you're sluts. If you're too strong, you're bitchy. If you're too gentle and classy, then you're passive. List goes on and on. Some people have a particular way about them, and all of those ways are okay to be. None of us have to be everything to everyone. Double standards aren't healthy for society, but they also shouldn't be considered hard and fast rules. Inflicting them on others when they're inflicted on you, whether you personally are male or female, certainly doesn't help ease tensions. What eases tensions is empathy and understanding, and nobody wants a piece of that shit, do they? What we want to be called. That seems to be another point of contention, though. More and more women these days feel condescended when they're called girls. Women do it to guys sometimes and call men boys. The idea is that the words boy and girl are usually used to describe children, therefore you're talking down to someone by calling them that. In the 5-minute video I linked in the description, actor Mayim Bialik of Blossom and Big Bang Theory fame attempts to make this distinction. Even the title of the video includes the phrase, "Why Language Matters." The video quickly became a clarion call to women's websites everywhere, and what do you know, now that's a line that can't be crossed without argument. She even goes so far as to suggest polite ways to correct people. I don't know, most of us when presented with the option of staying, quote, young at heart, usually jump at the chance. We all love things from our childhoods. Adults say be good to each other when leaving company, even though that's something you typically say to kids to remind them of something they should be doing anyway. I still play video games most of my free time, and even though many games out there are rated M or higher because of mature content or themes, plenty of people, old and young, look at video gaming as an immature, childish activity, a waste of time. Personally, I don't take offense to being called a boy. I did it to myself earlier in this video. There are ways to use a word like that to insult a person, and there are friendly ways to use it without negative connotation. I want to be a person that assesses what's said to me, instead of seeing everything as a line in the sand. There are ways to advance our society. There are unquestionably things about our behaviors we can change to make everyone happier and more comfortable, and arguing over petty words like boys and girls and thinking both are always insults, refusing to see any context or source, I think is wasting energy that could be used more productively elsewhere. Hell, during my rereads and edits of this, I tried to find the instances where I said girl and changed them to women where appropriate, but I probably missed one or two. If I did, I'm sure that makes me a misogynist. I'm sorry. Thing is, even though there are males who get insulted by being called boys and not men, women have taken that even further onto far more words. Perhaps you've heard the word herstory as opposed to history, which clearly can't be used to describe past events that deal with women. It needs to be herstory. History is not a masculine word in any way. But sure, let's change that. That's worth the effort. Plenty of feminists use the word women, spelled W-O-M-Y-N, so that they don't have to be associated with a word that has men, M-E-N, in it. And then the word W-O-M-Y-N per Wikipedia is criticized by trans women as being used in, quote, trans-exclusionary radical feminist circles, unquote, that shy away from human beings who are born male but transition to being female. No XY chromosomes within a 50-yard radius, I guess. At the end of that paragraph in the wiki link I put in the description, it says, see women born women, both spelled W-O-M-Y-N. Look, I want to support women and I want to support the LGBT community, but that level of identity politics was absolutely bound to spark a battle at some point. And men do it to each other too, though. If you shave even the slightest bit of body hair more than other men think you should, please, you're practically exiled from the club. That identity politics card is played on both sides, even just in different ways. And mentioning identity politics here isn't to imply that women don't suffer from prejudice or marginalization. They do. It's just that not everything that occurs in public or in media is truly as damaging as perceived. If you're not already, look at the screen for a sec. The game I captured footage from is Night Trap 25-year Anniversary Edition on PS4. A little history of this game. The original footage, as in the live actors you're seeing on the cameras, was originally recorded in 1987 for a Hasbro game console. 2 years after the footage was edited and the game was programmed, Hasbro canceled the console it was supposed to be on, and the game's executive producer Tom Zito founded Digital Pictures and released the game on Sega CD in 1992 as an interactive movie being joined by, in no particular order, Corpse Killer, numerous Make My Video games featuring Criss Cross, Marky Mark, and INXS, Prize Fighter, Slayer, Supreme Warrior, and one of my favorite guilty pleasures from back in the day, Slam 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 City with Scottie Pippen. Link is in the description to a 1-hour long play of that game that is just adorable, but corny enough to be epic. Anyway, Democratic Senator Joe Lieberman, who, quote, admitted never playing Night Trap, claimed it featured gratuitous violence and promoted sexual aggression against women. One game overseen considered particularly offensive and involved the nightgown-clad character Lisa being captured by augurs, that's the bad guys in the game, attempted to drain her blood, unquote. The entire purpose of the game Night Trap is that you're an agent sent to the estate to protect the women there. Granted, when Night Trap was in the controversial spotlight years ago, it was put there as an example more of game violence in general, being mentioned alongside Mortal Kombat than of just violence toward women in media. I can legitimately see being more offended by the idea that the women in the game are these props that you need to protect because they're too weak or incapable to defend themselves, but the game didn't promote violence toward women at all. Your whole purpose when you play is that you're trying to stop the violence against them. Even the website Kotaku, which normally leans pretty liberally when it comes to media, found it funny and tame when the anniversary edition came out last year. It's like looking at Elvis Presley now and laughing at how parents and grown-ups used to find his waggling hips and jumpsuit too provocative to let kids see, or that women couldn't keep their hands off of him in the first place for those very things. Standards change. What used to be considered violent or sexual nowadays aren't always considered so. And no, citing that Night Trap isn't encouraging violence toward women or disassembling parts of toxic masculinity aren't my attempts to mansplain away harassment and other abuse. Mansplaining, you know, when a man explains something to a woman in a condescending or patronizing way, or he tries to tell a woman about a topic that he either doesn't have experience with or doesn't know enough to comment on. I've been accused of that before when discussing things online with people. One such example that was pretty inaccurate. A friend of mine on Facebook shared a news story about a law being passed recently in Ohio banning abortion in cases where the fetus is diagnosed or likely be diagnosed with Down syndrome. Link is in the description to one such article. I'm pro-choice, and I'll grant while some people like to say being pro-choice isn't about being, quote, pro-abortion, it's about leaving people alone to make choices for themselves. Usually when you say you're pro-choice in an abortion discussion, it kind of means you're on the abortion side and not the baby killing is wrong, baby killing is wrong, baby killing is wrong, baby killing is wrong camp. However, during this discussion, I asked my friend and anyone else who read her shared items comments a simple question. How does the collective Down syndrome community feel about a law that ensures more people who have Down syndrome will be born and not just aborted because they're not quite right? Do they agree with the law and think fetuses diagnosed with Down syndrome deserve a chance at life, or do they think women should have the right to abort them for that very reason? I wasn't agreeing with the law or defending it. I was simply trying to encourage this liberal friend of mine to be sensitive to a group that likely suffers judgment as adults, a stance she would likely take if judgment against people with Down syndrome were the topic at hand, and see how they feel first before drawing a hard line in the sand. But her stance, and the stance of at least one of her friends, was that it was 100% unacceptable, woman gets to choose in all cases, partially because, and this is actually a fair point which I conceded, healthcare costs for children with Down syndrome and other such conditions can be extremely high, sometimes higher than a particular mother can afford. At least for now, that's very true, and a reason for which I'd support the law being overturned, as more than likely neither Governor John Kasich, a guy who, quote, supports policies that protect the sanctity of life, unquote, nor Ohio Representative Sarah LaTourette, who called it, quote, an issue of discrimination against a person not allowing them their God-given right to life simply because they might have Down syndrome, unquote, would think of passing legislation to make their healthcare cheaper to effectively call this bluff and turn aborting a fetus with Down syndrome into an issue of discrimination, and not just a platform for banning more types of abortion until all of it has been banned completely. But because I was asking a question and appearing to take the stance against someone's right to choose, I was accused of mansplaining. Even when conceding part of the argument and trying to get more insight, I was being condescending. Kind of the big problem with such an accusation. Sometimes it deserves to be called out. There are plenty of times when a man will talk over a woman, explain something for her or to her, and sound off in ways that show no knowledge or sympathy whatsoever. This does happen. But I wasn't talking over either woman I was commenting back and forth with. I asked a simple question and received a brick wall in return. I'm not going to hit every single entry, but I put a link in the description to a, quote, feminist glossary posted by USA Today, full of terms used these days, mansplaining being on the list, along with other male-associated rude acts like man-interrupting, which is when a man interrupts a woman, and bropriating, which is when a man takes credit for a woman's idea, every brand of feminism under the sun, definitions of all three ways of feminism, etc. The list is impressively long and really demonstrates how deep this goes if this is how many words are supposedly needed to map out how society needs to change. While some aspects in language and media are either misused or over-dramatized, some aspects are completely reasonable. Despite biological imperatives that make men more aggressive or dominating, there are plenty of obvious and easy things men can do to adjust our behavior around women. Sometimes a joke or remark is taken out of context or too personally, sure, but not assuming it's okay to touch women when you don't know if they want to be touched is entirely reasonable for women to want you to do. There's nothing crazy about that. Jokes are one thing. Different types of touch may have different degrees of offense depending on their intensity or frequency, okay fine, but they can still be discouraged out of respect for another person's boundaries and comfort levels. I'll gladly admit the world is not a sensitive place. Eventually someone around you is going to say something that bothers you, offends you, pisses you off, or makes you fearful or uncomfortable. And expecting the entire world to follow the rules in the feminist glossary may feel unnecessary or extraneous, but we can at least try for each other, work on this together, you and me. Unless, of course, we end up in the friend zone, then we're just done. That's always been a funny one to me. We've all heard of the friend zone, correct? That's when one person wants to be in a relationship with another person or have sex with them, but one declares outwardly that they're great friends and they don't want to complicate their relationship with emotions or physicality. I'll grant to men, guys, you have some right to be disappointed when you want a more intense relationship with a particular woman and can't have it. Just like women have a right to be disappointed when they like a guy who doesn't like them back in the same way. That's why I don't think either side snarling at the friend zone is entirely harmful. However, when you consider some of the gender-based expectations out there and some of the mechanical dynamics involved, at least for now, this is still far more a male problem than female. One reason a woman might make that declaration in the first place is to head off drama before it starts. She may want to clear the air about how she feels about the relationship, and being honest is a good thing. If that guy hears they're friends but he wants sex or a relationship, he can make an informed decision and go elsewhere to meet those needs. It's that simple. But I want that girl right now. Listen, if you want to risk pissing her off and think it's worth getting in trouble potentially with the law, you go right ahead. I'll play the role of Jigsaw. Your lifelong instincts will tell you to do one thing, but I implore you to do the opposite. And that reminds me, I really need to include more Jigsaw quotes going forward. I'll worry about that later. Anyway, the friend zone might not feel as blissful as you want it to feel, but if you're in the quote friend zone, you should consider yourself lucky you mean anything to that woman at all. Friends can last a long time, and friendships can sometimes change down the road. Nothing is just nothing. Negativity and strife, well, let's just say they don't always heal over miraculously. Sometimes those bad impressions stick around a long time. You may want to avoid making women angry if you like a particular woman enough. Men don't think it's very fair being looked at as ravenous animal rapists, but when a guy gets pissed off at simply being called a friend, it gives women the idea that, I don't know, you only care about one thing and maybe don't give a shit about her feelings or preferences. That may not equate to being a rapist, but it doesn't help your case of being understanding in any kind of way. Another reason why a woman might take that course is how men tend to look at the act of pursuing sex in general. How men anatomically need to find someone to penetrate, while women are the anatomical opposite, more in a position to receive and accept. Obviously, it's not always executed that way. Far more women than in years past go and hunt for men now, and far more men these days are eager to be hunted. But that's the most basic way it works. Women are more in a position to differentiate and decide who the right man is that comes into their life, and some aren't even concerned. Some could do without sex entirely because most women have had men proposition them since the earliest of ages. Link is in the description of Chris Rock telling it like it is. When you've had that many people court you and bug the shit out of you, it's a lot easier to turn shit down. Far more men pursue women for physical satisfaction though, and that human element of a person's boundaries, personal rules, comfort levels, morals, ethics, and even the law, which is often there to protect people's boundaries, personal rules, comfort levels, morals, and general ethics, all serve as obstacles in achieving that satisfaction. Is that to say women aren't capable of being driven solely by pleasure or power, and that women don't ever use men as pieces of meat? Of course that happens, sure. And when a man shares that he feels bad about being treated like a piece of meat, it should be respected and not brushed aside because men always need to be geared towards getting it in, and any man who turns down sex or is intimidated by it isn't really a man. Women can encourage toxic masculinity too, remember that. But when enough men do this to women or have done it to women over the years, it stops being a personal problem and becomes more of a systemic problem, one that has fairly simple solutions that all of us can start applying right now in ways we might not even notice day to day but can have a big impact. I said early on in this video that I don't strive to find ways to flirt with women, but I'll be honest, there have been plenty of times when I wanted to. Maybe I worked with a woman I was attracted to, or I frequented a store and always saw a particular woman working there and wanted to tell her she looked nice, or I liked the sound of her voice or something. Just off the cuff, like, say I see you here all the time and wanted to say I think you look awesome. Bye. Just leave it at that. No strings, no drawn out flirting, no thrown together small talk to stall until I build up the courage to get her number, so I can build up the courage to ask her out, so I can build up the courage to get her in bed. None of that bullshit. And I'm sure there are feminists out there who think even something as harmless as that, a casual, no strings compliment that goes literally nowhere but that one moment, is condescending and insulting because a man shouldn't feel entitled to impress his rating system on a woman, or because she's worth more than her looks. And I do agree with that. Thing is, men often turn that into something larger. That's the bigger problem. I don't think there's anything innately wrong with a random stranger complimenting another random stranger and leaving it at that, saying good day and never seeing that person again. That's a great thing to have happen. Women have become cynical about things like casual compliments because they see it ultimately turning into a come on or a phone number request or being asked out. They've come to hate hearing compliments from strangers entirely. And that makes plenty of sense. We learn to read signs from people, and when enough men direct simple compliments at women and follow them up with come-ons, well, women have learned to read that and avoid it. A woman who's flirtatious might give a sexy eye to a guy she meets in public, never see him again, and not think twice about it. And most people would agree that's pretty harmless. I agree, that shouldn't be a big deal. But if a man does something as small as say something nice about a woman and she, I don't know, doesn't seem pissed, that becomes a green light to up the intensity. When she finally gets uncomfortable with the conversation, because at that point it's not just a casual flirt but a full-on investment of time, his mood changes to anger so quickly. And not just in person-to-person encounters, it happens in online exchanges over messages all the time. I linked in the description an article from Huffington Post about an Instagram account account called By Felipe, which details this, but you've seen posts and memes about this all over social media. I just can't figure out the motive of completely annihilating any chance of making a good impression that quickly out of the gate. Like I said, the friend zone may not feel as intimate as some people want, but friendships can at least have a chance of becoming more eventually, and even if they don't ever change, friends are still invaluable. I'd rather know a woman I'm insanely attracted to as a friend and nothing more than push things with her and risk never seeing her again. In terms of remaining reserved for safety purposes, enough people out there probably doubt compliments from strangers that it's murky waters. Just like catcalling. Most men you ask about catcalling women, they probably think it's harmless, though truthfully, I'd be afraid they were making fun of me. If I knew 100% women who were hooting and hollering and whistling at me were seriously attracted to me, it might be different, but there's no way for me to tell that. And even if I appreciated it happening maybe once a year in the right setting, if it happened constantly, it'd easily stop being something to appreciate, and eventually I'd feel like an animal at the zoo. No one wants to feel like that. Freedom of speech is one thing, but feelings like that should probably be reserved for more private conversations. When you respect another person as a human being, you're more concerned with how they feel, where their head is at, and if they themselves actually want to do certain things, instead of feeling the need to coerce them into things or manipulate situations using guilt or lies or bargaining, or change their entire worldview just so you can get off. But I'll go more into privacy, actions, physical behaviors, and especially consent next time. This is Killer Cardinal DA7 reminding you to use your head, be nice to each other, and take the time to think. Talk to you later.
Look, it was your job to protect Kelly and the rest of those girls. But from what I've just seen, the place is being overrun. You've missed way too many of those suckers. Now, until you figure out how to do your job and do it right, you're dismissed. Breaking contact.